In the military summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 3rd of May of 2026. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and we will start with the state of Armenia, where according to information we have, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, arrived with official visit. After visiting one ally, Azerbaijan, Zelensky arrived in Armenia. A European Political Community Summit will take place here in Yerevan. He will be requesting something from the leaders of Poland, the United Kingdom, Norway, Finland, and the Czech Republic. This is a very important piece of news, and either this is a very bad signal for Russians, or maybe the Ukrainians are going to ask the Prime Minister of Armenia to use the territory of Armenia as a place for negotiation process between the Russian Federation and Ukraine itself. So one important thing we need to know that Armenia is a part of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So as you can see, as you know, this is an alliance between the Russian Federation, the Republic of Belarus, the state of Armenia, and several countries from Asia like Kazakhstan and so on. So this is first of all a military alliance where the Russians, despite the fact that everybody is equal, we understand that the Russians are in charge and officially in charge of this alliance. And we need to understand that the president of Ukraine visited the territory of this alliance. Basically, the president of Ukraine entered the territory where the Russians have very strong forces and very strong positions. And the Russians had possibilities to probably even arrest the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, but for some reason they decided not to do this. We need to understand that as of the state of Armenia, there are Russian bases and the Russian military forces. And Zelensky came to the state either to probably show a message and a signal to the Russians that the Russians don't control the state of Armenia anymore, or maybe Zelensky once again came to Armenia to ask the Prime Minister to use the territory of Armenia as a negotiation negotiation table between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Probably we will understand this very soon. Now let's return back to Ukraine and let's continue with massive attacks. The Russians on the 1st of May of 2026 started the largest, probably the biggest attack using hundreds of drones since the beginning of the special military operation. For example, on the 1st of May of 2026, we received a report that the Russians during the day used more than 400 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. During the 2nd of May of 2026, we received additional report, and according to this report, the Russians used 463 drones between the 1st and the 2nd of May of 2026. As of the 3rd of May, we received several updates on this matter. For example, during the 2nd of May between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m., the Russians used 227 drones. Later, during the night, the Russians used additional 269 drones, and during the 3rd of May, the Russians used additional 241 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. Summarizing everything, the Russians, since the beginning of the 1st of May of 2026, used more than 1,300 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and this is the biggest number since the beginning of the special military operation. We have already discussed the roads that were published by different sources, by pro-Ukrainian mappers, and as we discussed during the previous video, this was not just a massive attack using drones. This was also something where the Russians were either testing their technologies, their new equipment that they are planning to use in the future to control the drones, mainly through the northern parts of Ukraine, in the area of the city of Kiev, and further in the western direction towards the border with the state of Poland, and of course in the Chernihiv region. And it seems that according to information we have, the Russian tests succeed, which means that most likely in coming days the Russians will intensify their drone attacks, and they will continue using and improving their new both smash technologies and probably equipment that the Russians used through the southern parts of the Republic of Belarus to control and to manipulate with drones that are flying over the northern parts of the state. And of course, during the day, we received lots of updates on the matter how exactly the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine. And for example, right now in front of your screens, we can see the latest wave of attack that took place between 1 p.m. and basically 7 p.m. of the 3rd of May. The Russians, as for the latest attack, used hundreds of drones, and the Russians most likely used smashed network. In these videos, in these pictures, we can see how huge number of drones were crossing the border between the Russian Federation and the Sumy region, and how these drones were entering the territory of Ukraine. Probably the Russians were using both reconnaissance drones and decoys drones and military drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. And most of the drones were attacking objects of military and critical infrastructure of Ukraine just through the northern part. So we are talking about Chernigov, Sumy, probably Poltava and Kiev regions. Most of the attacks and most of the explosions and the biggest number of drones disappeared right exactly in this area. But there were several drones, as you can see, according to these pictures, that managed to move further in the western direction from the city of Kiev. And as you can see, these drones were moving along the border with the Republic of Belarus. Maybe the Russians were testing these drones, and they were testing how exactly they can control these drones when attacking further in the western direction. As of these attacks, we haven't received almost anything about explosions and strikes during the evening. Probably the only updates on this matter we received from the city of Dnipro, because during the 3rd of May attack that took place between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., the Russians also used missiles. At least 2 Iskander missiles were used to attack the Dnipropetrovsk region. And in this picture, we can see the consequences of attack. As you can see, the entire building was almost reduced to ruins with this strike with 2 Iskander missiles. And the sources are saying, mainly pro-Russian sources are saying that this building was something like a barrack, or was something like a place for foreign volunteers, or maybe for foreign mercenaries that were attacked by Russians. As of the end of the 3rd of May, neither the pro-Ukrainian nor pro-Russian sources published the date information about the numbers, but it seems that the Ukrainian forces suffered huge losses as a result of this attack.
Så vidste man, at i det øjeblik lyden holdt op, så gik der 2-3 sekunder.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, so during the previous day, we received lots of important updates. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have a very interesting video published from the city of Sumy. We have a very long video, and we have lots of episodes through this video. But at some point of this video, we can see how the Russians were flying over the city of Sumy with FPV drones, and how the Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. So the Russians, using drones, just regular FPV drones, can establish certain control over the settlement, and the city of Sumy is located around from 27 till 40 kilometers from the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. As for the changes on the ground, during the previous day, we received additional changes to the north of the settlement of Sumy, around the settlements of Mala Karchakovka and Karchakovka. According to these changes, as you can see, the Russians continue offensive operation further in the direction of the villages of Kianitsa and Novosich. So most likely there are very heavy clashes in this area, but the most important goal of Russians is not even to take under complete control the settlement of Novosich, but to take under complete control the settlement of Ivolzhanskaya and this big forest. And if the Russians are able to do this, of course the Russians will start using these forests for concentration of troops before moving further in the southwestern direction and in the southeastern direction, with the purpose to encircle the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Satki and further in the southwestern direction. There is a very big concentration of Ukrainian troops in this area, and we see that the Russians are trying to outflank this concentration of troops and to attack these forces from behind. from west and from the southwest, and of course from the southeast, where the Russians these days, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Miropolye. And these are the changes on the ground in the Miropolye direction. The Russians, according to the group of forces north and according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement, and the Russians continue offensive operation further. But it seems that the Russians are not going to cross the river of Psol in this region. The Russians, as of now, are moving further in the southwestern direction, probably trying to outflank the river of Psol and to attack the settlements of Rmala Rybitsa, and from these positions to attack further in the western direction. So most likely after the end of May's holidays, we'll see a lot of updates from this area, because the Russians are going to use the Sumy direction as a primary direction for their summer offensive operation. Furthermore, during the day, lots of attacks and explosions were recorded when Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with aviation and with drones.
Er du klar på en til?
Husk, at du med indbetalingsflex fra AP Pension selv bestemmer, hvor meget du indbetaler til pensionen, hvis du nu lige skulle få brug for lidt luft i økonomien. Hos AP Pension er vi altid med dig hele vejen.
Another important area is the settlement of Velika Pisarevka. This is already the most southern parts of the Sumy region, and during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, lots of updates were recorded in this area. The Russians intensified their activities in this direction using hundreds of FPV drones, trying to attack as many as possible positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. And the most important thing is that most likely the Russians are going to intensify their offensive operation in this region with the purpose to cut almost physically the Sumy region and the city of Sumy from the city of Kharkiv. So it's something tells me that most likely in coming days the Russians will begin another offensive operation, this time with the purpose to move between the settlements of Velika Pisarevka further in the southwestern direction towards the settlement of Krykovka. The Russians most likely will try to cut railways connecting the city of Kharkiv and Sumy from the northwest and in the southeastern direction. If Russians can cut these railways, of course, the city of Sumy will start suffering additional problems with logistic supply and support. The Kharkiv direction. As we discussed during the previous video, the Russians right now are focused to attack gas stations. And just during the previous 3 days, since the beginning of May, the Russians destroyed 8 gas stations. They were hit by drones strikes in the Kharkiv region over 2 days. So between the evening of the 1st of May till the morning of the 3rd of May of 2026. The targets were in the Osnovyansky, Saltovsky, Kholodnarkovsky districts of Kharkiv, as well as in the city of Chuguyev and the region. Most likely the Russians will continue these practices because Russians understand if they destroy gas stations, this can lead to unpredictable consequences to the entire logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. Furthermore, the Russians intensified their offensive, their attacks in the northeastern parts of Kharkiv region around the settlement of Kolodezhne. In this video, we can see how Russians managed to discover a warehouse of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the settlement, and then the Russians attacked this warehouse with aviation. Here we can see also a secondary detonation. So this video confirms that a warehouse or small ammo depot of the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area was destroyed, which means that in coming hours the Ukrainians will suffer huge problems with munition, which means that the Russians most likely will use this situation to attack the settlement with the purpose to establish complete control, while the Ukrainians are not able to show any resistance to the Russians. If Russians take this village under complete control, they will cut this territory in 2 directions, and first they will finish the battle for the territory between Novosilovka, Nitrofanovka, Petroivanovka and Kolodezhne, and then Russians will continue offensive operation further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Veliki Burluk. So the Kharkiv direction as well as the Sumy direction are primary directions for Russians.
kone bestilte den her ting online, sagde jeg at det var spild af penge. Siden den ankom, har jeg brugt den hver eneste weekend.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kostyantynivka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received additional changes on the ground, and these are the changes. So let's talk about them in details. The Russians continue offensive operation. If you remember, just almost a day ago, we discussed that up to 25% of the city of Kostyantynivka fell. But now we can say that by the end of the 3rd of May of 2026, 27% of the city of Kostyantynivka has fallen. The Russians during the previous day improved their position significantly through the eastern flank of the settlement, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians continue offensive, and we have geolocations confirming additional progress on the ground. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the Krivorozhsky Street and Sekino Street, and we have a report that the Russians also improved their positions between the villages of Dovga Balka and the western parts of the city of Kostyantynivka. And these are the changes on the ground through this direction. This is the end of the 1st of May, this is the end of the 2nd of May, and this is the end of the 3rd of May. The Russians managed to improve their positions. We have a geolocation confirming this. Here we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the central part of the settlement of Dovga Balka. Furthermore, several sources stated that the Russians continued offensive operation for them through these three lines, and it seems that from this direction, the Russians are through these three lines. The Russians are planning to move further in the direction of the most northern parts of the settlement of Kostyantynivka, probably with the purpose to establish control over this territory. And if Russians are able to take these territories under complete control using these three lines, then most likely the southwestern parts of the city of Kostyantynivka would be caught by the Russians in Cauldron. So this is the situation in this area. We believe that after the end of the May's holidays, the Russian offensives will only intensify. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dobropolye direction. During the previous day, lots of videos were recorded from this area, especially from the settlement of Dobropolye. Here we can see that the settlement was almost reduced to ruins. In this video we can see a Russian FPV drone attacking a vehicle of the armored forces of Ukraine in the southwestern parts. As you can see, according to this scene, the buildings in this area were since the beginning of the battle for this area have been damaged significantly. Furthermore, the Russians attacked positions of the armored forces of Ukraine through the village of Dobropolye, which is located to the southwest. In this video, we can see positions of the armored forces of Ukraine and vehicles through the settlement, and here we can see how Russians were attacking forces and equipment of the armored forces of Ukraine moving through this area. So the Russians are trying to establish a certain FPV drone control or another kill zone over these territories, just with one purpose: not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy their troops, reinforcements and reserves through the village of Dobropolye in the direction of the settlements of Chernigivka, Shevchenka, Vadyanska and Svitla, which means that probably in coming days the Russians from positions in Novoalexandrovka and from positions around the settlement of Belitska will try to attack in this area with the purpose to take these villages under complete control. So the battle for Dobropolye intensifies.
Ja, og nu er du tilbage fra frokost.
Som tidligere tordengud elsker jeg mit nye job her hos DCC Energi. Og jeg stopper ikke, før vi for alvor er på landkort.
DCC Energi. Ja, det kan vi sagtens hjælpe med. Hos os får du både A-kasse og lønsikring til Danmarks billigste pris, som giver dig op imod 7.500 kroner oven i din dagpenge.
As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous day, we received a report from several pro-Russian sources that the battle for the southern parts of Novopavlovka has finished. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 2nd of May, and this is already the end of the 3rd of May. The Russians, it seems, managed to take on the complete the territory. It seems that Ukrainians control just less than 30% of the settlement, and in coming days the Russians will continue offensive operation in this direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Novopavlovka, and then from these positions to continue offensive operation further in the western direction with the purpose to take under complete control all these territories to the south of Mizhova. And probably from these positions the Russians will continue offensive operation in the direction of Mizhova from the south and from the east. As for the Zaporozhye direction, there are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians continue testing the defenses of the armed forces of the Russian Federation by attacking them from many directions. So these are the changes on the ground around the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka. Several sources stated that the Ukrainians counterattacked and improved their position significantly between these villages. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, according to information we have, continue testing positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the direction of the settlement of Uspienovka, but as for this territory, the situation is stable, and the Ukrainians continue their major counteroffensive operation through the western Zaporozhye direction, and these are the changes on the ground. We have a video published by pro-Russian sources of how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the southern parts of Primorska. We have lots of buildings that were damaged and destroyed by Russians, which means that the Ukrainians, as a result of a counter-offensive operation, managed to answer this part of the settlement, and now the Ukrainians managed to isolate Russians who are currently located on the territory of the southern part of Primorska. Now the Russians most likely will try to counterattack the Ukrainians in this area with the purpose to unblock the Russians in the southern parts of Primorska, and at the same time the Ukrainians will continue their counter-offensive operation from the north in the southern direction. So this is a very important battle because the results of the major Zaporozhye battle depends a lot on the situation and the results of the battle to the south of the river of Konska. But most likely in coming days we will understand everything. And that's it for